Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right To podcast, where we amplify voices, share stories, and drive change in the fight against sexual assault. We explore the critical issues surrounding student safety, institutional accountability, and survivor empowerment. In every episode, our goal is to provide insightful conversations with survivors, experts, educators, and advocates, giving you, our listener, valuable information, resources, and actionable steps to create safer environments and cultivate a culture of respect and consent. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Aspire. I think I start almost every show with this in terms of my excitement about the conversation ahead, and I don't want it at all to be discounted in terms of my excitement this week. We have a very special guest with us today, David Roncolato, a retired professor from Allegheny College. And the reason why I am quite excited about our conversation today is our organization behind this podcast, I Have the Right To, has been on quite a journey since our founding 8 years ago. And as our listeners know, it started because of the sexual assault that impacted our family, the sexual assault of our daughter, Alex Prout, 10 years ago. And my wife and I started this work with the organization I Have the Right To, with a mission and a passion to make sure that other victims of sexual violence did not go through the same hardships and pains that our daughter, the rest of my children, and our entire family went through. And our work has blessedly exploded in terms of receptivity around the country. And of course, we think the message is quite important, but it's also been because of the wonderful people that we've been able to associate with. And two of our key drivers of our programming, of our passion, of our love, is our Katie Shipp, our executive director, and Javon Hatcher, who leads our engagement and fundraising roles. And these two people have been deeply impacted. I think a lot of their life has been shaped by our guest today. And I wanted to dive into a conversation because I've heard so many wonderful things about this man. And this platform is used to highlight men who can make a difference. And we want to listen, learn from our guests, and then figure out within our being, how do we convert that learning into action? And everything I've heard, that this man has been about action his entire life. So Dave, I'd love to turn it over to you for a little introduction to our audience, and many thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Alex and Javon and Katie and others. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I'm very open to going where this conversation takes us. Has given me an opportunity to stop and think a little bit about my own experience growing up, the messages I was getting on what it meant to be a man, a boy, a man in this society. And I'm eager to share pieces of that my story might speak to others. So again, my name's Dave Roncolato. I work at Allegheny College as a professor and administrator, engaging students in the wider community beyond our campus. And I worked in campus ministry initially and did some other things. So I was involved in a lot of different ways with Allegheny. And someone just asked me yesterday, what is it about the job that I did that I miss and what I don't miss? I said, I don't miss all the meetings, but I do miss the students who were very strong educators for me. And certainly one of the programs, the one that both Javon and Katie were a part of, our Bonner Leader Scholar program, was one of the sources of students that taught me the most over our time together. It's a service-based scholarship program funded out of a foundation in Princeton, New Jersey, that offers full scholarships to students, not to come and play football, not to come and play baseball or basketball, but to come and do engagement work in the wider community. And so you can imagine these remarkable young people coming right out of high school with some remarkable stories, coming to Allegheny College, and then being asked from day one to give back to the community on campus, but also give back to the community beyond campus as well. So that's how I've gotten to be so close to Katie, Javon, and many other students over my time working in that program.
Well, it's interesting, Dave, that you mentioned, the students in a unique way. You refer to your students as educators, for me. And that I wanted to jump in, and Gabriel, sorry for cutting you off, because I needed to sort of point out that my co-hosts for this podcast, Gabriel Viscogliosi and Hugh Eastman, are also both educators for me. And it is a remarkable thing when I think you do look at the work of engaging with young people, and we can dive into this, Dave, is that engagement with younger people is I've also found always to be educational, so meaningful for me in terms of helping my own evolution as a human being. I will now use that segue to turn it over to my fearless co-host Gabriel.
Thank you also so much, Dave, for your introduction, and thank you, Alex, for what you just said. And clearly, kind of throughout most of your life, you've devoted it to forming others and helping others change and helping them kind of become their true self and really focus on service. And obviously, you had a large spiritual and a religious part of your life as well. So while you're kind of forming all these other people and helping them become your best self, what has helped you kind of make you the man that you are today? Has it been more younger people, older people, or people? Is it people in general, or is it more experiences based? Because for me, I feel like the people around me has really shaped who I am, and who I've become, because I think they are who I can really draw inspiration of. But I know some people, it can be kind of the environment that you surround yourself with.
Good question. Thank you, Gabriel. I remember when I was graduating from college thinking about what I was going to do, and I said, I know that the people around me will really influence a lot about who I am and what I'm going to do and the values I hold, and I know they will help shape who I am. And in some ways, I had a choice to choose with whom I'm going to be accompanying in my life. And so putting myself in connection with people of deep integrity and deep commitment was critical in terms of my understanding of who I am and what I wanted to do with life. And just to give you a little bit of backstory, if I may, I had very supportive, loving parents that were operating with a very different understanding of what it meant to be a man in the world today. So I love my father dearly. But I was raised with kind of a warrior framework. He was in the Navy in World War II, saw a lot of action. He grew up when he was in the Navy. That was his formative experience. And so we were raised with, playing with guns and battling and I had a birthday party that was a Civil War battle, and I was the Union soldier and my brother was the Confederate soldier. He's 2 years older than I am. So we were raised with this kind of warrior understanding of what it meant to be a man. Boys grow up to be warriors. We also were involved in sports. So that if you had another kind of archetype of what it meant to be man, it would be to be the Olympian, to be the athlete. And so in high school, I played 3 sports: football, I wrestled, ran track. And I remember coming to the end of my senior year in football. We had won every game. I had suffered some injuries. I remember coming in and putting my head up against my locker in the locker room at the end of the last game. And literally the words came from deep within myself: I'm glad I never have to do this again. So there was something in me already growing, even in my high school days, about being a different type of person, And when I got out of college, my priority was to to doing meaningful work with young people. And I was hired by a local church to be a youth minister, which I did for 8 years. And before I went back to work at Allegheny College. And so my priority, because in part I had privilege, I had parents that were able to support me a little bit. I was able to not worry about the priority being making enough money to pay back student loans and make ends meet. But certainly there was a subtle message in what it meant to be a man is to be a breadwinner. And so I remember feeling a lot of negative feelings from my parents not when I was just, myself and my wife, Sarah, married, but once we started having children, there was a clear expectation coming, even though it was not overly expressed all the time, was I need to make more money to take care of this family. That was an expectation. So yes, I don't. That's a roundabout way of saying who you associate with will indeed shape your values and your identity as part of shaping who you are.
So it is fascinating to me. There's so many questions that emanated from that, Dave. But one thing that jumped out to me is, and I want to discuss your, for lack of a better phrase, masculinity journey, right? Because I think I was born in '64. My dad fought in World War II. I think there are many of us of this generation, right, that grew up with very a fixed definition of what it meant, to be a man. And, you had mentioned, two things that influenced you, that warrior spirit that your father brought. And, we know that comes with the stoicism that is required for any warrior, right? Because feelings and empathy and such are not useful tools when it comes to the warrior mentality. And we're hearing a lot about the warrior ethos, these days in the current, sort of atmosphere in media. But you also touched upon, sports. And, we are blessed in our org to have several former professional athletes who, I think open us up to a different world about, the impact of sports, both negative and, positive. One of our previous guests, Don McPherson, who is a college football quarterback from Syracuse, played with the Philadelphia Eagles. He on this podcast said a very interesting phrase, and I'd love to get your thoughts. He said, the normal thought process is that sports has a masculinity problem. We see many headlines, all the times in terms of toxic behaviors from different professional, athletes. But Don said, and he has a very unique perspective on this. He says, no, his thought is the opposite, that masculinity has a sports problem. And would love to get your sort of reaction to, that phrase through the lens of how you grew up and through your experiences through your professional career.
Thank you. That's a great question. And my thought there goes immediately to the body, right? To the body, our human body, because it is the body that we can either reverence and respect and trust, or it's the body that we can abuse and demand of it things that it is not comfortable doing. And you think back to a child, like when a child is hungry, you know it. When a child has a wet diaper, you know it. When a child is time to sleep, they go to sleep. And we have, and this isn't just for men, it's for women. We are socialized to control and manipulate our body's needs. And so this plays out. How does this play out in sports? Well, it's the almighty blue tent on the football field where the athlete goes in limping and comes out and continues to play the sport, and we say, what is the magic in this blue tent? Well, part of it is a reinforcement of the warrior athlete mentality is like, okay, there's nothing seriously broken here. We can give you a shot to take away the pain. And are you willing to go back in? Of course, yes. So I think that's a part of it. But so I think there's a place for sports. I really believe it. I have 8 grandsons right now, and almost all of them, some of them are still too young, but they're all involved in sports. And I think sports have a lot to offer in terms of teamwork and motivation and training. All of that is good, but it also goes too far. And that's where I think helping young men and women attend to their body and love their body is a critical criteria for understanding when sports is demanding more of my body than it should be. My mother went in and talked to our wrestling coach about us losing weight and fasting for wrestling. She was like, he's not taking care of his body in order for you to have a team to wrestle and stuff. And she didn't tell me she was going out. I was kind of embarrassed at the time, but that's the sort of thing where, like, okay, how do I learn to attend to my body? And we know it comes back to haunt us later in terms of life if you don't pay attention to your body at a younger age. So yes, I think so. How did I unlearn it? Well, I shifted the types of athletic activities I did. I moved away from competitive to like bicycling or walking, and I think there's a way of really just trying to notice how. I mean, I'm 69 years old now, so I better be paying attention to my body because my body's going to wake up and tell me you better be paying attention. So I think that's an important part where I think for young men, boys and young men, there is an unlearning about what our society is telling us about being how we handle our bodies and what we do to control our bodies. And there's an unlearning there in order to really allow the voice of the body to have its say, and not really always push it aside. I think Carl Jung's famous saying, "The body doesn't lie. The body doesn't lie."
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you just said, Dave, and especially what you were just saying at the end with the voice of the body, because I think also the body, when we think of the body, it's just the physical body, but I think also we have to reconcile with the mental aspect of the body and how you're dealing with it mentally, because I think often boys, at least how I was growing up, I was just more focused on the physical condition of my body and how I performed externally, and if I did perform poorly, let's say externally, I kind of ignored how that made me feel internally, but I think that's often forgotten by a lot of young men. But I think also that connects to the spirituality aspect of the body and the spirit, because for me, I grew up semi-religious as Catholic, and I think religion often plays a big impact on someone's view of masculinity, and depending on where they get their religions from, if from the Bible, from the Torah, or the Quran, that can definitely alter their perspective of masculinity, since religion is often so deeply ingrained and embedded in someone's family history or their family kind of traditions. So I would ask you, how did that maybe shape you, or how, since you got your PhD in Catholic social ethics, how has that maybe shaped how you approach masculinity, and has that made it for the better, or maybe do you think it is maybe not been as good for some people?
Beautiful, great. I'm happy to answer that, but if you afford me one question back to you, how did you learn already at your age about your own body and what your body was, what you just shared with me? Well, how did you learn that piece? What was it that taught you, may I ask?
Yes, of course. Well, I think for me, it's really just, I think the importance of checking in. We often talk a lot about checking in, and just, I've had some good role models I've been very lucky to have some good role models in my life, but also just taking the step upon me to realize that maybe I haven't been doing that well, but to actually acknowledge it and recognize that, but accept that. I think acceptance is a really big thing. And when you're able to accept the challenge that you're going through, you're able to actually push past it. So I think when I've started to recognize my challenges, that's when I've actually been able to go through them. And I think seeing success from actually taking proactive steps to work on mental health or kind of internal struggles has helped me get past that and realize the importance of that, and then also talk to my peers about it, because I think especially at a high school level and when we're all minors, it's not really talked about this issue as much, but I kind of was always thinking about it. But then when I actually went out and talked to my friends about it, and I heard that they were also all thinking the same thing, that just also really raised the importance of it internally to me, and realized what I was doing was why I was doing what I was doing, and realized the importance of it. So I would say that's why I've kind of learned to kind of find that balance between focusing on physical health but also mental health as well.
Great. That's great. Okay, so I need to remember what you asked me now. You asked me about how my own spiritual journey informed, and if I would say, it's a movement from what binds and bounds to what liberates and sets us free, right? So I think that's, if I wanted to say my understanding of the spiritual, it's understanding what is binding and bounding, whether it's guilt, whether it's violent experiences, whether it's neglect, physical hunger, displacement, whatever that has bind and bound us. The spiritual life, if we do the work that you're talking about, Gabriel, and others, we do that internal work, we realize that we don't necessarily forget those experiences, but we can move to being, they have less power over us and then they had before we came to that awareness. So I applaud you for your work. Certainly Alex for the work he and his family unfortunately have had to do around the sexual violence of their daughter. So I think that's a part of it. So my sense of where to begin is just to begin by noticing. We notice, like, oh wait, like I noticed my putting my helmet on my forehead and the helmet on my locker in high school. And it took me, I still played a year of college football. I still thought that was what I needed to do. But noticing that experience, like I literally said, I'm so glad I don't have to do this anymore, was something that was visceral that came out from inside. So begin to notice that. And I think what happens is we have experiences and relationships, I think they're important, that come alongside the dominant narrative of what it means to be male. And when these other experiences come alongside those, it begins to break open the monolith understanding of this is the only way you can be male in this culture, in this time. And those experiences that come alongside are what begins to break open the freedom and liberation that I think is so important for wholeness as human persons.
And you said right there an important word in terms of the wholeness. Um, and I do think it's very hard to reach that balance in life. But you earlier said something really beautiful, Dave, that when we're children, young children, right? If we're hungry, we cry, we express a need for that nutrition, that food. If we have a heavy, wet, diaper, it's also something that is just a natural, reaction. Again, we will cry. Uh, and You also mentioned, the other sort of natural function of sleep, right? When we get sleepy, and we might wail our way to sleep, but eventually we get there. And it's such a beautiful, sort of image of going back in time when life was simple. Um, and, I want to talk about your work with the Bonner Foundation, um, because it sort of appealed to me, seeing sort of their mission statement of really focusing on the basics, right, in terms of nutrition and education for young people, in terms of the focus of the service work. And knowing that and hearing you say that word as you were growing up, I needed to be the breadwinner, right, for the family. I needed to go out and make some more money. And I thought, boy, that's a fascinating statement because it connects to, sort of that mission of Bonner in terms of that nutrition element. But like all things, especially when it comes to masculinity, we tend to twist, meanings to conform to what society is telling us versus the essence of who we are as children, right? In terms of the basic needs, in order to function and stay alive. Um, because, sports, is one area that I think, can twist the definitions or the meaning of what it means to be a man. Obviously, the warrior mentality and the military, by definition, has to reshape, your thinking. I've spent nearly 40 years in finance, and absolutely, that industry sort of reshapes and causes you to twist definitions in many times. But somehow you found a path, and tell me, because most men go through this process of saying, I need to be that breadwinner. And we tend to then say, I'm dating myself. When I was, in the middle of my career, I'd tell my wife and my kids, it's time to make the donuts, off of the Dunkin' Donuts commercial where the guy wakes up at 4 a.m. to, go literally make the donuts. In your process of saying that, I need to be a breadwinner, how did you maintain your focus, your, the spirit inside of you in terms of saying, well, I want to be the breadwinner, but I'm also want to do what I think I'm meant to do.
Good. Yeah, really good. First of all, just to say, I recognize that I had the freedom because we had parental support. Like, in other words, if for some reason I had no money coming in, or my parents would bail us out, my wife's parents would bail us out. And there are many people who, as much as they want to go do altruistic things and service and commitments, the financial reality of like, no, I need to go do something to make money right now. So I want to make sure, as I'm recognizing my own privilege as I tell my story around this particular issue of being the breadwinner, and then back to Gabriel's point, it's like, who are your peers? Who are the people around you who are voices that reinforce your authentic self? Who are the people that you put around you that reinforce who you really are? And so I hung out a lot with priests and nuns. And so priests and nuns don't have a lot of money, and they are fed and they're rich in so many ways. But it doesn't have to do with being breadwinners. I mean, in fact, they relinquish that. I mean, not diocesan priests, but certainly women religious in religious community, they take a vow of poverty. Now that's very countercultural, right? A vow of poverty is about as countercultural as you can get. And chastity, a vow of chastity. So, I mean, they are actually saying, we are going to define ourselves in a way different than the way our society defines us. So having the privilege over much of my formative years of knowing priests or ex-seminarians, religious women or religious women who left and got married, to listen to their stories and have them being authorities in my life in terms of helping me figure out who I am and who I wanted to be in the world. And then, so I don't know if does that speak to that question, Alex?
Yes, it does in very, I think, profound ways. Um, but I'd love to challenge going another level deeper, on that, because my brother was a Jesuit priest, and again, sort of the same vows and the focus on education and learning. Um, and you said something there about it's that viewpoint is countercultural. I'd love to sort of dive into that because I think there are many people that are faced with things that are countercultural, right? And I understand whether it's your peers or not. In my household, I had one brother who was a Jesuit priest, and my other brother who's 12 years older, who was in the financial sector. So I almost felt like I had to choose, which path to be, being the youngest of the three boys in the family. Um, but there also is a mindset to say countercultural is sort of being put up there as in a leadership or an example position. But I'm sure you were also surrounded by any number of other influences, whether it's through the media, in the newspapers, on television, in other members of the community. And I think there's an absolute correlation to what everyone is facing today, right? Which path do I choose? Because, every day you're faced with 20, 30 decisions that can alter the course of your life, literally. Um, how do you make those decisions to say, this is what I want to be, this is what I want to do?
Good. Yes, that's really, really good. And I think we can only make those moments, those discernments in the moments with the information we have at a particular time. We can't always know how this road's going to take us or where it's going to lead. We can only try as best we can to be true to ourselves in making the right decision in this particular moment at this particular time. And I think that requires kind of a heroic humility to say, I'm at this fork in the road and I can go this way, or I can go this way. And it seems to me that the road that's truer to myself is this particular road. And no matter what the consequences, I'm going to go down that road. And I think that's where I think if there's anything we can do to help elevate the self-esteem of young men and women to the point where they can trust their inner voice, their spirit, their true identity, if you will. If we can elevate them to the point where they really can be architects of their own future, navigators of their own ship, if you will. And that's where I think this work is. Not that we're going to completely dismiss warrior, athlete, breadwinner, but in the midst of that, we're going to hopefully encourage and invite a deeper level for men to come to understanding who they are and who they're called to be in the world. And that will make a huge difference. So with the Bonners, just to circle back on the Bonner community, it was a pretty rigorous interview process and selection process for these students. And they were groups, they were only, I think, 10 to 15, I don't remember the numbers, each year of these students getting these full ride scholarships to Allegheny College. So they're coming into a school that was an elite, kind of primarily white school, a private liberal arts school, coming with stories that were very different than the stories of many of the other students, who had coming with all kinds of luxuries and coming from the best schools ever, and they come then to Allegheny College and say, okay, kind of where am I going to fit into this world? And so there's a lot of moments of disconnect and kind of dissonance in this experience. And our work as a team with student leadership and our staff was to help each Bonner understand and value their own journey, as painful as it was to get there, to get to Allegheny, and realizing what gift and what potential they have to contribute moving forward. So the work of owning your own journey was very important. So there was a woman from a school in Erie who had her dream to go to medical school. And so when I talked to the guidance counselor said, this person is the most committed student she'd ever had. If the snow was so bad that there was no public transportation to get her to her school, she would walk to school in the morning to get there. Well, she wanted to be a scientist. She wanted to go to pre-medical school. The public school that she attended in Erie didn't even offer the courses that she needed as prerequisites to get into a strong science track at Allegheny College. So the structures, and she ended up being a very successful person. I've kind of lost track of where she is now. But to understand that the journey you're on is your journey, and to respect it and honor it, even if it has been a painful path at times. One of our Bonners, at a very young age, found his father dead in the bathtub, and the grandparents had only a matter of a few days to come and get he and his sister out of the environment because the mother wasn't going to be able to take care of him. And so his journey, very, very successful person now, came through a very painful way. He was raised by his grandparents and ended up being very successful. But there's work to be done in terms of us uncovering and working with the journeys we've been on. So when we were working with the Bonners, we helped them discover that they were called to be healers in all kinds of ways because they had the potential of great empathy and great ability to walk alongside people who have suffered from painful experiences. And so, but there was a sense their wounds could be ways of healing for others. And so we would ask a lot of them, we want you to go out and work in a low-income housing development, even though your family may not have ever been made the cut to get into public housing back home yourself. We would ask them to go out and work in feeding hungry people at soup kitchens when maybe they remember much of their life not even having enough food for themselves. So how do they become healers even though they're coming out of their wounds? That's a lot of work. And it's important about community, and it's important to have support around you. And I wanted to say maybe one other thing related to that is I really believe that tears are important in terms of defining what it means to be a man in the world today. And so I was very much socialized not to cry. Like crying was a sign of weakness. And I had to teach myself as an adult how to cry. Like I literally had, even my mother, who was a stoic kind of German, Pennsylvania Dutch German, I never saw her cry. And so I had to teach myself to understand the importance of tears. And I mean, when we were trying to get into the Bonner program and have Allegheny being a part of it, and I'll never forget the day that the Bonner Foundation director on the steps of Bentley Hall at Allegheny College, he had just finished a meeting with the president and some other members of the cabinet, and he said, I think we're going to make this work. You're going to become a Bonner Scholar School. And I literally cried in that experience of tears of great joy. But I had to teach myself how to cry. That was certainly not part of the warrior, not part of the Olympian, not part of the breadwinner motif that I had been taught growing up. Well, I mean, it all comes back as gifts. So my mom in fall of 2001 was diagnosed with inoperable pancreatic cancer and was dying. And they were living in Brevard, North Carolina, near Asheville. And so I only had one brother, and my brother's out to sea in the Navy. He was a career Navy officer. And so one day I was talking to my parents. I talked to my dad afterwards. And this is when my mom knew she was dying. She knew she had pancreatic cancer. And he said, my dad said he was in with my mom and that she was crying. And my dad's reaction to her was saying, well, that's not going to help anything. Right? So my dad's framework was like, these tears are not going to help anything. And with that, I became aware of the fact that, okay, I now need to go down and teach my dad how to handle my mother's tears. So I made as quick arrangements as possible. It was like a 10-hour trip down there. And, I went there many times at the end. But I went down and I literally said, Dad, when she is crying, that's an understandable expression of what she's going through. And what you need to do is just hold her hand and let her know that it's okay that she's crying. I said, can you do this? He said, yes, I can do that. So the tears came back around. I had to teach myself how to respect and honor the tears that were welling up in my eyes at different times. And the gift of it was, so that was the kind of the wounded healer process. I ended up being able to use that to help my mother die a little bit less anxious about her tears.
Well, first, I just want to say I'm so sorry for your loss about your mother. And second, I think what you just said about tears and crying and not really being allowed to cry, and your father also kind of having that same idea initially just resonated with me so deeply, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners as well, because I think that also connects back to what you said earlier about I'm so glad that I don't have to do this anymore. And I think I've thought that same thing many times as well when I was going through something and doing it, but I just stuck with it and I continued to do it, and I kept that external idea of kind of stone cold face, and I didn't cry. But instead, now looking back on it, if I did cry instead and I actually took a time to pause and I let myself cry and I maybe stood up, I would have actually changed the trajectory of my life and actually improved it and stopped myself from having all this pain that I incurred just because I continued to go through with it and suffered in silence. And I'm sure that a lot of our listeners also have that same experience of suffering in silence because they were just taught to kind of keep their head down and don't show emotions. So do you have any memories or things that you can speak of yourself maybe just continuing to go down in silence, or was there one moment where you kind of flipped it and did the opposite and actually said, okay, no, I'm not gonna, like with football, I'm not gonna just keep going until it's over, but actually stop before it gets too bad?
Yeah, so I think it's a matter of respecting when, no matter what the externals, you use that language, I appreciate, the externals are telling you should do, respecting the internal voice that says, this isn't right for me. And if that comes with tears, great. If it comes without tears, U-turns, we always said U-turns are permitted. I mean, you can say, we're going this direction, we're going to go in another direction now. And so, and I think the idea of it is, who are our allies to our true self? Who are the allies who can help you affirm and support who you really are and who you're really called to be? And I think that's the work here of not completely dismissing warrior, Olympic, breadwinner frameworks, but saying alongside of that, there are many other beautiful ways of being a male in the world that can be empathetic, can help be a builder of bridges, who can take their own wounds and turn them into healing for others. I think there's a lot of other pieces of that that I think are important for us to lift up in terms of a redefining of what it means to be a male in our society today.
So I want to stay on that theme, the state of being a man or a boy in our world today. Would love to get your thoughts on the state of men and boys today. If you're optimistic, if you're hopeful, if you're pessimistic. When we look at the data, Dave, mental health statistics, the state of boys and men today is not healthy. We see a lot of stress, anxiety, a lot of disconnection happening with our young men, because whether it's because of the remnants of COVID, the upswing in social media and the different ways you can spend your time without any human, actual human contact. I think a lot of the connectivity amongst our boys today is through video games and people that they don't really know, but who are existing on these, sort of platforms. But as someone who's dedicated their life to service and learning, and you've said such beautiful things today on the podcast that I have notes that I can see emanating into slides, for our work, and I'd love to continue, connecting, Dave. But as someone who's been in this, literally their entire career, what is your view of the state of men and boys today, and what can we do as a community, as a larger community, to try to keep things going in the right direction?
Yeah, I think that it's crisis, right? We know we can say this, it's a crisis time. And a crisis time is a time when things are pulling apart, but it's also, and every crisis is a great opportunity for something new to be born, so something new to happen. And I think that crisis is really the cracks in a limited understanding of what it means to be male. And I think our young people, young men, I don't want to speak for them, they are experiencing the dissonance of this cracking of this. I only have three options: to be a breadwinner, a warrior, or an Olympic athlete. And if I can't meet all of those, then I'm going to get depressed and whatever. So I think human to human contact is and mentorship. The work that they do in terms of now training high school coaches to understand the breadth of the experience of their young men that they're influencing, I think is beautiful. The counseling sessions and counseling departments in high schools and colleges are growing, and we are doing a lot of work on taking away the stigma of what it means to go to therapy, and to do that kind of work. So I commend the professionals who are working in attending to the critical issues that young people are bringing up. And maybe it's a little bit of, there's, suicide rates and depression rates and, all are very much, but we know more now than we did before. And so in some ways, this is a great opportunity. Gabriel talked about, people just lowering their heads and hiding what's really going on. So it's kind of like bring it out in the light, folks. Let's bring it out in the light and know that there's lots of resources and support. I know that at Allegheny, like our counseling department had to grow by members because of just the critical needs going on among mental health issues among students. And that's not just Allegheny specific, it's everywhere in higher education. So yes. I think it's a critical time. We're maybe in a crisis, but that crisis gives us opportunity to really do something new, and to bring out a fuller understanding of what it means to be male. So.
And as you mentioned earlier, Dave, you mentioned how you have 8 grandsons. So if there is one value that you would hope your grandsons carry on into adulthood, and for kind of any young men or any young person in society, what is that one value that you want to kind of be instilled in everyone?
I have to think about that for a minute. So I would say authentic relationship, that they will grow in a deep commitment. Like all of our children, they're very different, doing very different things, but they have a shared sense of authentic relationships and how important authentic relationships are. So, I know we're not going to have too much more time, but when I was thinking about this, I did think about one piece from a book that I've used many times in Bonner trainings and with students, and I think it might be worth offering. And so, can we go in that direction for a minute, Alex? Thank you. Okay, so these two sociologists, research couples, Parks Delors and the Keens, James and Cheryl Keen, did research on 100 people. This is back 20, 30 years, I think. They did research on 100 people who stayed committed to making positive contributions for the long haul. So they weren't just episodic, working in a soup kitchen or clothing, rehab, whatever. They were like committed for the long haul. And they identified across all kinds of spectrums these 100 people. And they said, what are the common characteristics of these 100 people that sustain them in their work over this time? And so they did a lot of interviews and talks and second interviews, and they ended up publishing a book called Common Fire, Leading Lives of Commitment in a Complex World. Common Fire, Leading Lives of Commitment in a Complex World. And in that, there are two that really struck me today as I was thinking about our time together today. One of the qualities was the idea that these 100 people across the board learned how to live within their tribe and beyond their tribe. They had both the ability to be rooted in who they were and who their community was, however you define tribe in terms of social group, family, workplace, whatever tribe you want to define it. But they were rooted and committed in their tribe, and at the same time, they had ability to build relationships beyond their tribe. They were comfortable both living within and beyond their tribe. And I think that's a quality that we should try and support. When all of us at one time or another may have had the experience of being othered, when someone lets us know we are not a part of that tribe, whatever that tribe is, we know what that feels like. And we also probably have done the other side of othering someone else. But these folks who are in it for the long haul, these 100 individuals, showed signs of being rooted in their own tribe and being able to, in a very profound way, engage in people from different tribes. And the Bonners have taught me that over and over again. And so that would certainly be one I would lift up. The other one was the one that what commitment looks like in the long haul is the power of the double negative. This is the chapter 7, the power of the double negative. And the power of the double negative is, I cannot not do this. As we move into deeper commitments of who we know we are, we come to places and crossroads, no matter how difficult they are, that we cannot not do it. That this is where our deepest selves are calling us to go, to be there. The power of the double negative is what you cannot imagine yourself not doing. And in that sense, years ago I started going down to on a mission effort. We don't even use the term as much anymore, but in a particular holler in Lewis County, Kentucky, just not far from Portsmouth, Ohio. And we would go for a week in the summer, and I started doing it when I first got out of college, whatever stuff. Well, I've been going now for close to 40 years to the same place, and I know 5 generations of some families. I know people's great grandfathers who they never ever met themselves. So when I think about this particular challenge of commitment, the double negative, what I can't imagine myself not doing. I literally said this to one of the organizers down there, like, I can't imagine myself not coming. I can't not go to Kentucky. I have to go to Kentucky. That's part of who my core identity is now. So I would invite, as we think about the journey of becoming liberated, powerful men in our communities and in our society and our world, to think about what it is that is this power of the double negative. And or to summarize it very simply is, we want to challenge young people to do who they are. We want to challenge them to do who they are. First, to know who they are, but then to do it, to begin to act upon their deepest self that calls them to be something more. And that's where I think the real work is. And it takes courage. It takes humility and it takes courage. But to invite them to do who they are.
Thank you, Dave, for that message. And do who you are just resonated with me so deeply, and I think with all of our viewers and everything that you said today. And we're just so grateful to have you on this podcast and we had such a great episode. I think our viewers will take away so much. I know I took away so much as well myself, and I'm sure Alex did, as always.
We have the name of this podcast, and it is I Cannot Not Do This. I think that is such a lovely message to leave in the ecosphere, rebounding through the universe with the broadcast of this podcast. That is now a challenge to all of our listeners. If you're listening to this, somehow you care, right? And it's, how do we convert this into action? How do we identify and understand our love inside of ourselves, and then express that to the broader universe? And, I am doing this work at age 61, Dave, and my wife and I get up every single day and we say this: we cannot not do this. And oh my gosh, again, this is the miracle of these podcasts. And Dave, I want us to stay connected through this because we need your positive energy. And the universe needs this, and we need to find ways to make this contagious, because guess what? There's so many other things that are quote unquote viral. And notice that term, that's what everyone is seeking. But what is a virus, right? It's something that infects you, typically in a bad way. But we need to start spreading out other messages, right? Because, I am so motivated from talking to you. So thank you for the tenacity, the resilience, the courage that you've shown throughout your career, and that you're continuing to sort of give in a life of service. So listeners, you've heard Gabriel, Hugh, and I say this all the time. This is the best episode ever. And hopefully we keep on saying that. But thank you, everyone, for listening to us. Thank you to everyone for supporting us. And just be good to yourselves so you can be good to others. Dave, thank you. Gabriel, thank you. Javon, thank you for introducing Dave to us in this universe. And we will wrap up another wonderful episode. Thanks to our audience. And until next time, this is I Have the Right to Aspire. Thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on all platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends about Aspire. Follow us on social media at I Have the Right To. Learn more about our student and executive programming at our website at ihavetherightto.org.